Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTube. I got a question for you. Do you spend enough time with God? Do you spend enough time in prayer? And with that question, I'm going to do you a favor and answer it for you. No, you don't. You don't spend enough time with God. You don't spend nearly enough time. But spoiler alert, neither do I, and neither does anyone. This whole idea for the video came about from one verse. And I'm sure you've heard the verse before from people, even if you don't know exactly where it's located. The verse is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17. It's pray without ceasing. I'm sure almost everybody's heard that from a pastor, the term pray without ceasing. How do I actually pray without ceasing? Because that seems totally, you can't even wrap your head around the idea of that being possible. Where because there's so many jobs, so many things you have to do, so much stuff of life that gets in the way, and it's like, well, that command to pray without ceasing seems like it's just made to trip you up. It's made to almost be more like a finger pointing, haha, you can't do it. And in a way, I almost think that is almost the point of it, is to say, yeah, this is impossible to do. Because, the amount of respect we should give God is something we're incapable of giving Him. The fact that there is an all-knowing, all-powerful creator that is controlling everything, He deserves nothing more than our constant attention, and our constant prayer, and our constant worship. But we can't give that because we're sinful humans. And God knows that too. God's not an ignorant God. And that's something to remember as well, that I think people get out of line, is they'll forget that God is a very personal God to us. He's not some, ancient idea of a God that created the world and then disappeared for thousands of years. He's active in lives and in everything right now. And not only is he active in them, he's currently perpetuating them. He's, if that's the right word for it, he's currently, creating and allowing stuff to happen. Because when you really start considering the idea of God, you will come to the conclusion that nothing can be existing without God's constant intervention in it. God has to constantly be, I guess you'd say, thinking stuff into existence, constantly willing things into existence for them to exist at all. The idea of existence as a whole is a concept created by God. And it gets past the point that we can even comprehend it with our minds. But the point I'm trying to get across is that God knows our struggles, and He knows we're humans. He knows that we are incapable of doing certain things. And one of those things is constant prayer, is to constantly be giving Him the respect that He deserves. Now, if you take this verse and just look at, in Thessalonians, just look at verse 17 there, pray without ceasing, and you take it, just on its own, you think, okay, that's impossible. I can't constantly be praying on my knees. But if you take a step back for a minute and remember that prayer isn't something that has to only happen in one room of your house, only when you're kneeling down, only, when the lights are off, only at a certain time of the day. Prayer is something you can do at any time, anywhere to God. It's not something that, you need to speak out loud for. You don't have to, do any specific ritual to pray to God. You can do it at any time. Now, I'm not saying, again, your mind can be attentive to it all the times. There are times when you're having to think of other things, that you can't be praying to God. It's just not possible at all times. But again, like I was saying, God knows that. We forget that we will have eternity with Christ. We will have eternity to be connected to God. And in eternity, we will be able to give God the amount of worship and respect He deserves. If we fail to give Him an hour of our day, if we fail to give Him an hour in a week, because I'm sure the average amount of time people spend with God is about maybe 45 minutes to an hour in church each week. A whole lot of people don't even pray, don't even, think of God outside of that 1 hour of church. And I'm not to say that that's good. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fix that. I'm saying you should spend as much time as you can in prayer, as much time with God as you can, every day. But recognizing that we're humans and we're going to fail. We're not going to do it perfectly. And to remember that, like I said, we have eternity. We have eternity to give God the worship He deserves. We have eternity to give Him the respect He deserves. If the first, 50, 60, 70 years of our life, if we fail for those first couple of years to give God the respect he deserves, we still have infinite years. You know, whether you live 10 years, whether you live 60 years, that's nothing when you tack it on to eternity at the end of it. And when we lose sight of eternity, when we forget about it, is when we might start to get worried about things more, because we're more worried about, oh, I have to do it now. Because, God says that 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. So, in God's perspective, if you forget about him for one day, you have forgot about him for 1,000 years. And he hasn't destroyed you yet, because, again, he knows who you are, and time doesn't affect God, because he created time, so he's outside of it. So, again, if you forget to talk to God for a little while, don't beat yourself up over it. Sure, when you think about it, when you remember about it, try to fix it. But I guess I'm trying to say is, don't be too worried that you have to perform something exactly or God's not going to love you. If God's love for us depended on our actions, we'd all be screwed. That's the whole reason why Christ died on the cross for us. God's wrath was poured onto Jesus Christ when he was on that cross, so that we won't be punished for our mistakes down here. We aren't punished for the things we deserve to be punished for. And that's not an excuse to sin. That's not an excuse to intentionally go against God. But it's an act of God's mercy on us. Of him saying that he knows that we're imperfect. He knows we're sinners. And he has chosen to love us anyway. One more thing I want to touch on. If you take this verse and just do verse 17, I think I started to say this and I got off track talking about eternity. I guess not really off track. But verse 17 says pray without ceasing. But look at what two verses it's sandwiched in between. Verse 16 says rejoice evermore, and then it goes into say pray without ceasing. Then it says, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Before it says to rejoice, and after it says to rejoice. Prayer isn't always requesting things of God. I think we have a skewed idea of prayer where we think that it's, prayer is, you pray to God when somebody's sick. You pray to God when you need a new job. You pray to God when you're asking for a spouse. You pray to God for clarity. It's always a request. Prayer can be rejoicing. A form of prayer can be singing. Prayer can be thanking God. Prayer can be in anything you do. And like I said, it doesn't have to be in a specific room of your house. You can be at work and you can start humming to God. You can start humming and singing and worship God that way. Recognizing God in things is a form of prayer, I believe. It's just being aware of God's hand in life. Being aware of God's presence in everything that happens, good or bad. Whatever you're doing for your job, no matter how menial it is, just praising God and saying, thank you that I'm able to experience this. Thank you that I'm breathing right now, that I'm able to see, that I'm able to think, that I'm able to even think of God. It's that constant awareness of God, I think, that is more of what prayer without ceasing would mean. And I'm not trying to say this is what it means, but prayer without ceasing might mean just be aware of God. Be aware of him in whatever you're doing. Be aware of him in the worst of times and the best of times. Just that it's like his praise will forever be on your lips. His praise will forever be coming out of your mouth. Just being grateful for things. I guess that's the word I think I was looking for. Gratefulness. Prayer is a form of prayer can be just gratefulness to God for what he's given you. So, in wrapping this all up, what I'm trying to say is that don't worry if you haven't spent enough time with God. None of us have, and none of us will in our short 60, 70 years down here. That's what we have eternity for. Now, I'm not saying not to praise God when you're down here, not to pray to him. Definitely do it as much as you can. Spend your time in prayer to God. It will change your life. But don't worry if you haven't. Don't worry that you've, lost something. That you've, since you forgot to pray to God for the first, 40, 50, 60 years of your life maybe, depending on how old you are, that, you've lost something precious. You have eternity. And we just can't lose sight of eternity. And I think that's what it comes down to. Just don't lose sight of eternity. So in that, I'm going to leave you. And Lord willingly, I'll see you all later.